The Jet Black Hedgehog, Chapter 1. It starts with there being an emergency up on the Ark because a giant lab animal is on the loose and wants to eat the scientists there. It's good that it starts out exciting. But why can't I see the eyeballs of this guy running away from it? And why does he look angry? And why does the guy to the left of him have these stupid swirls on his glasses that don't even cover all of them? It gives you mixed messages because the situation is serious, but the art is so goofy that it looks like it wants you to laugh at it. It's kind of derpy that the eyes of this monster are just circles with no circles around them. I hope I learn why the situation happened. But how could it be justified anyways? You'd think scientists would make a cage for this thing that can't be broken out of by it because they'd have known how strong it was in the first place. It's sweet that these people are impressed by his powers instead of intimidated. He takes forever to actually get to the thing somehow when he's supposed to be fast. He even has the time to say a full sentence to it first. And then he just kicks it. I thought he was going to spin dash at it. It would take more effort for him to kick it instead. The whole point of the spin dash is that it's got sharp spines that are lethal, so he's just kicking so he won't kill it on the people who wanted to research it. But still, why did he make it look like he was gonna spin dash it then just to do something generic that's lame by his standards? And he says this when everyone thought he was only this way because he lost the people he liked. Apparently, he'll still spend the whole time in gruff anti-hero mode, not caring that people are praising him. Why doesn't he get asked to get them the sedative? He could get it for them much faster. Do they just assume he only helps in a combat way? And he could also get them the fire extinguisher much faster. But he just walks away lazily. I went into this figuring it was overrated because it was only praised for being like the games. And I'm seeing nothing but stupid stuff that proves me right. I don't buy that there wasn't any Hedgehog DNA involved that just happens to have the same powers as Sonic for him. Jill just lied to him about this for no reason. Oh, it wasn't for no reason. It's so he wouldn't ask to meet the Hedgehogs he's related to, potentially want to live with them or visit them daily, and thus not be on the Ark 24/7 to protect it. The needs of the many, it's doing more good if he's here to protect all the people here. Cream has a mother, so I don't know why he wouldn't be allowed to be made from Hedgehog DNA. Because that would be giving a game character a relative when they were fine with Cream having a mom. It's interesting to see Shadow angst for a new reason this time. He's insecure because he didn't turn out to be capable of healing Maria of her disease. They literally did try it as soon as possible, they just failed somehow despite making him to do that. It finally explains why she was still on the Ark after he was made then, but I'm just wondering why the scientists ever made him then, because they should have known science well enough to know he wouldn't turn out to be a miracle cure for everything. And the very idea of a cure for literally everything that isn't even nanobots is so laughably unscientific anyways. Oh, I guess they were desperately hoping that his black arms and biolizard DNA would make him a panacea without being to research black arms first. No wonder he was made with magic's assistance. Because he didn't understand after all of human history somehow that the Emerald's power can't cure diseases. People have said that because chaos is power enriched by the heart, you can literally do anything with chaos powers. Then Shadow would have healed Maria. Why didn't he bring back Maria? He's had an emerald in his hand before. The angstiest he's ever been has been half because of himself not measuring up because it's an ego thing. When it's the sorts of angst that only involves someone else suffering, his reaction doesn't involve an emotional outburst. I'm not even really judging him. I think he's been acting just like I would so far. I did 2 of the what Sonic character are you tests and got Shadow in one of them. But there was room for interpretation in regards to how his personality was when he wasn't just interacting with Maria. Because before now, we only saw how he was back then when he was talking to Maria. So of course he would have been willing to open up and seem vulnerable. It's not a retcon if there's nothing to contradict but a false assumption of ours that Shadow only became about ego as a coping mechanism after losing Maria. It's not even worth being called a retcon if it doesn't contradict anything. Him being the ultimate life form and the coolest person on the ark would make him always feel superior because he was, and get sore about not measuring up because of the big shoes he had to fill. My point is, it would be hypocritical to not admit there was room for interpretation anyways about any other stories that build on canon from the games. And only say it to excuse Shadow's being an introverted grump before he said it'll be a date to die for. Maria puts her hands over Shadow's eyes, and he's got the common sense to assume it's her because only she would trust him enough to prank him. I like seeing Maria do something new and be quirky and not 100% pure good. Nothing about her character before this manga implied that she would ever do anything even slightly immoral. And then this comes along and has her do something to annoy him just for kicks. But because it's framed in a playful way that's not hateful, it's actually fine. As long as this is as far as it goes. Because this seems out of character as it is. I like that I had the guts to just barely escape the boundaries of how she was before in a way that makes her start being interesting as a person. So she's not a Mary Sue. So she's not literally perfect anymore. Why did the writer have Maria say he was just looking grim when she would have heard him talking? The talk bubble should have been a thought bubble. If he was really talking, he would have known she was only pretending to not hear him. Maria says she had something to show him and starts running holding his hand, and he gets overprotective of her because he doesn't want her to get too worked up. He says out of nowhere that she's subdued by low gravity but still very sick, like it is going with the idea that Flynn came up with out of nowhere, that somehow low gravity has Maria be less sick. Which is actually not how it works in regards to disease. This isn't written by Flynn, and the person who is responsible for the plot of SE2 didn't have this idea in mind and disagreed with Flynn's idea on that. I wonder if the sentence clause wasn't actually in the original script, and the fan translator just added it in because there was room. He clearly shouldn't have. This is convoluted bullshit. Everyone knew she was on the ark because there were less people there, so it's less likely that she'd catch something. It's simple as that. Speaking of convoluted, I guess I always assumed that he could have cured Maria, but it was just taking a long time to make a cure. She shows Shadow that the earth is shining because the sun looks like it's rising over it. He points out that she's seen this a lot before. She acted like she was going to show him something that never happened before. What took her so long then? I assume this isn't the first day she ever met him. She falls over while overheating, but then she sits up and starts acting like she's fine, but I guess she's just pretending she's fine. And out of nowhere she says that he was made to heal her but couldn't, and reveals that she did realize what that would make him go through. This is only not out of nowhere if she did hear him earlier in the story. Why don't she just have this conversation with him right away? How would anyone have forgotten that cutscene at SE2 where he told Maria with no prodding that he just doesn't know anything anymore? Which isn't something this Shadow would admit. That Shadow would have just told Maria how he was feeling immediately. Or if she heard him, she wouldn't have thought she needed to pretend she didn't hear him until after she showed him something nice. She says she wants him to see things that are beautiful, kind, and strong. So she's talking about animals as well. So things isn't necessarily the right word. She says there's a meaning to being born, and for no reason, he says there's no such thing after all of that. He was never this angsty in the games. Why can't she of all people reason with him? This is the same person who convinced him to be a hero later with just a couple of sentences that were hard to understand to begin with. Didn't even say the word hero, and yet he didn't take her seriously here. Even taking this on its own merits, how is this better? Apparently he only humored her on her wish for him because there were last words. I guess her getting a fever was because she caught it from someone else. Because while simply having a weaker immune system alone, cause a fever by itself at random, that isn't always the case. Yeah, Maria was great in this scene, but the comic's not just Maria talking. Shadow starts this moody teenager narration about his life by thinking that Maria's always a hassle that he's just dealing with. What? So what, he never liked her and only cared about her because he cared about anybody? This is the way modern Shadow would think about some other sick kid than Maria he'd have to help. The reason Shadow downplays in his thoughts out discomfort that he can feel sorry for someone and not want people to get hurt and just expresses pity as annoyance instead is because Maria already died, so he doesn't want to focus on any more depressing things after that. It was relatable to me that he was like that. It's not just because he doesn't want to feel weak, because then he'd be on the same level as those weaklings who are inferior because he can't win in fights with dangerous stuff. That sounds like Surge. It dumbs him down and makes him annoying to make him think like any typical tough guy just because he's strong. And pretend he wasn't motivated by Maria. We only assumed at first that he was a snob for being the ultimate life form, but the appeal of him in SC2 was that it turned out he had a best friend in the past and acted nothing like that back then, revealing that he wasn't always like that. Or else he would have looked down on Maria too. Shadow's thoughts say that he's just doing stuff because he can. There has to be more to it than that. What's the point of narration by him if it's just as dishonest about himself as he is when actually talking to people? If he thought there was no point in saving people, he wouldn't actually do it. Then he thinks that dealing with Maria might not be so bad. I still hate the phrasing. What's with the might? Like, he was just born. Why would he not want her positive energy around to uplift them when he feels bad about not being her cure? He would be like her shadow. She says she wants him to watch the shooting stars with her. And again, Shadow doesn't appreciate it because he can't notice beauty. Why does she bother? Then they see Earth Defense Forces already. That one's fast. Why doesn't it just say Gun Forces? And she of course tells him to look for and help anyone who'd be more in need of it. The soldiers send the scientists running and are conveniently terrible shots despite being trained as soldiers, so they don't hit any of the scientists 2 feet in front of them. It could have easily had the scientists be around the corner in a hallway. The soldiers have the good motive of wanting to destroy dangerous biological experiments. And since they don't care about the scientists there, to them this would only be worth doing if they jumped to the conclusion that Gerald only made them in a plan to try to use them to cause trouble on Earth. And they could have thought that even if he told them otherwise, because of course he would lie about it. Was there new management gone recently? Why did they let Gerald make stuff for so long when they were always suspicious types? Why did they even hire him? Wouldn't they have gone his resume and saw how incredibly amazing he was? Why did the soldier even volunteer this information to these guys when he didn't have to if he didn't care about them? Shadow kicks down the soldiers. And just now can a character hear what someone said without sharing a panel with him. Why would the next group of soldiers just talk stating the obvious instead of instantly trying to shoot Shadow and the researcher? They would suck in a war. The soldiers already know their orders. I assume they are the same soldiers, or why did they get back into a standing position? Shadow remembers the researcher saying he's so proud of him. But then after Shadow takes a dumb risk of looking back at him to tell him what he should have already assumed he knew, during which they should have both been shot, he sees the guy who was asking for help from the soldiers, and naturally tries to get on his side the larger amount of people who could talk the other soldiers into sparing him. Because Shadow can't always look at him, so as soon as Shadow's back was turned, he could have just been shot anyway. He swears he'll stop doing research, but the soldiers shoot him anyways, without it showing it. So he should have just run away and trusted the really fast Hedgehog who could carry him to safety while running fast in seconds. Shadow could have done that instead of stopping to state the obvious for no reason in a dangerous situation and easily avoided this. So combine this with the fact that the soldiers would have shot the researcher without politely listening to him talking first. And this is forced drama. The soldiers had no way of knowing the researcher was telling them to help him out of panic. It was more intuitive to assume he would just rely on his previous savior with amazing powers to save him again. So they would have shot him before he could get a chance to betray Shadow. And even though this guy was so upsetting to him, seeing him die still made him mad and got him to attack his way past them. Everyone assumed Maria was the first and only person he saw die, but apparently this OC stole her identity there. Once again, it's not a retcon, but it's a bit of retroactive continuity that's annoying for nothing. He runs away going to help Maria, and I wonder if this is even real or just a hallucination or bad dream when Maria says a lab animal would be disgusting to know, as if she'd be disgusted by animals. Sure, it would be smart of her to tell them whatever she can to make them spare her. Somehow Shadow doesn't figure this out and just takes it to heart that she's just as two-faced. The soldier knows she's lying to them from intel, which justifies why she ends up admitting that she does know Shadow. Because she's already screwed, so why not yell at them at that point and look cool? Again, it tries to make her have more of a character than just nice girl. And in fact, she's the opposite right now. Even though there was no hint that she would act like this in the games. It never seemed like she would have a backbone enough to yell and be disrespectful of anyone. Like the last time she was out of character. I see both sides of the story in this one. It makes just as much sense to hate it as it does like it. It fits with how depressing Shadow's backstory is that this manga would be so emotional in how it tries to present itself here. Shadow remembers what we already saw Maria say, as if we were so stupid we needed this to understand why he'd want to save her. He thinks that the meaning of his birth is Maria. I thought he'd pick her up and instantly run far away with her over his shoulder. Why does he just stay still in front of her and risk them both being shot? They already know their orders, so why does the soldier waste his time talking, which gives them enough time for Shadow to beat them all up? Maria's not even someone who could make dangerous experiments yet. You'd think the person who first made the order to kill everyone aboard would have already known that the Ark doesn't just consist of researchers, so the order wouldn't have been so broad. So they had to make the soldiers jerks. Shadow asks Maria if she's okay, and she realistically screams out of fear. This makes sense because she doesn't know for sure that she's gonna die yet, so she's not accepting of her fate. Then another soldier shows up as they are wasting valuable time staying still, and as the soldier shoots without being given a reason to, the background shows some eye with a pupil that's so narrow that doesn't even look like it's human at all. And that's the end of it. It doesn't explain any further what that was about. I already heard people saying this was supposed to imply that Black Doom's eye brainwashed him into it. Bringing up the question, why didn't Black Doom instantly brainwash Shadow into obedience then? And how can he do this to someone without his blood to control? I would have assumed this was symbolic of what a monster this guy was. Especially since it's a comic that's already full of exaggerated art anyways. There's nothing actually behind him, so it really does look like he wasn't even there. Anyways, how is it necessary to establish that Black Doom brainwashed him into it? Can't you just keep it simple and go with the assumption that everyone already made? That the soldiers were just dicks? I remember hearing that the story isn't canon anyways, and so this doesn't even matter. I remember that because I saw this panel, which is exactly what's being talked about. What's the point of this issue then? It's not enjoyable to see Shadow be an angsty, grim-dark edgelord at the wrong period of time. Maria gets shot before getting to make her speech to Shadow and use the escape pod to have him escape. So how'd she have lived long enough to make her speech then? This would only make sense if this whole scenario with the soldiers never happened. And it was all just a bad dream of Shadow's. That would explain the laughter. I have no idea who wrote this. Even taking this on its own merits, which I didn't know to do at first because it doesn't tell you right away, this isn't canon. Of course Maria was interesting to watch, but not in character. And the last part of it is so depressing. My main problem with the story is that this is taking place at the happiest part of Shadow's life, where the only stressful situations were ones he could easily fix, always. So everyone would expect him to not be gruff, antisocial, and angsty yet, which he only became in Heroes, but he still is. So I don't feel like I'm even seeing Shadow's past for real, and it turns out I never was. But then it was too much like the game's universe anyways, because it shouldn't have had the setting at all that primed me to expect a game characterization for Shadow. It's an uncanny valley. I'd rather continuity be so unfaithful right away that I'm not expecting 100% accuracy that makes me even more critical. Sure, Shadow is distressed at Maria getting sick easily, but that's not so traumatizing that it would make it impossible for anybody to be a cheerful person. It didn't magically turn everyone who has to see that, like Gerald, into an introvert who's just annoyed at winning over a giant lizard instead of relieved that the people around him aren't in danger anymore, or happy that he was so competent, which is how normal people would react to that victory. Sure, it's a failure for his original purpose, but he clearly had a unique purpose in saving people from experiments. So what's with him not knowing the meaning in his life? Because he didn't like those researchers anyways? Even though they fawned over him? Then why did he save them? He likes Maria because she's nice to him. I guess because she's nice to him out of more than just hero worship. I can't help but be alienated the whole time by the fact that Shadow's not being like how he was supposed to be like back then. And I'm not even a game purist. It can be different if it's still good. I'd be very surprised if people much more picky than me were not alienated by how Shadow is. I don't feel like this is Shadow, the guy who opened up to Maria without her even needing to try. I feel like this just Steve the Hedgehog, alternate universe Shadow who is always in his angsty teen phase. And even taken as his own continuity, what's likable about Shadow if he's like this without a good excuse for it? I can't see a valid artistic reason for portraying Shadow like this even in his past. People liked his anti-hero personality because they assumed it was because of Maria's death, and him having no one he liked as much as his lost loved ones anymore. And because he was around Sonic so he'd be redundant otherwise. Neither reason applies here. If you're gonna do this, why not go all out with it? Show a bunch of greenery all over the arc. Make it look different. I can't not be cynical about this portrayal of Shadow when the meta logic is so obvious that he's only being written like this because the writer's only familiar with recent Shadow. Or maybe Sega just told him to write like this, because Sega only remembers how he was in the recent games. If it was written by the writer of SE2, that made me wonder why he forgot how his own character was and didn't go back to it, or chose to just write him how people are used to him being now, continuity be damned, when he knows better. So that wouldn't make me feel any better. I heard that his official character bio is still written like he never stopped being a villain in SE2, and hasn't been updated since. It looks like the writer was never a Sonic fan, or if he was either heavily restricted by Sega, or he never saw the cutscenes in SE2.